Alex once believed that love was the safest place in the world. For him, it was the one thing that could never fail, an unshakable truth he held on to tighter than anything else. He lived with this belief deep in his heart for years, trusting it more than logic, more than the people around him, and even more than he trusted himself. He thought that as long as he had love, everything would be okay. But one quiet night, without any warning, everything changed. His entire life was turned upside down. He had given his love completely, without fear and without holding anything back. He believed that honesty and loyalty were the magic ingredients that could keep two hearts bound together forever. But love didn't protect him the way he had always imagined it would. A single mistake, a misplaced trust, ended up costing him everything. The woman he loved, the center of his universe, simply walked away without a single glance back. She left behind a trail of broken promises, a stack of unpaid bills, and a silence that cut deeper and hurt more than any argument ever could. In the span of just a few weeks, Alex's world crumbled. He lost his relationship, the one he had poured his soul into. Then he lost his job, and with it, the future he had so carefully and meticulously planned. His savings, which he had worked so hard to build, disappeared in a desperate attempt to fix problems that were never his to begin with. The apartment that once felt so warm and full of life now felt cold and hauntingly empty. It was filled only with memories he couldn't escape, ghosts of a past that now seemed like a dream. Every morning was a battle. He would wake up with heavy eyes and an even heavier heart, the same question echoing in his mind. Where did I go wrong? He would replay old moments over and over again, searching for clues, for answers that never came. The noise inside his head became unbearable, a constant loop of pain and confusion. To escape it all, Alex found refuge in a small cafe near the street corner. It was a quiet place that smelled of fresh coffee and rain, a place where no one knew his story and no one bothered to ask questions. He became a fixture there, sitting in the same seat every single day, staring out the same window. He watched people pass by, their lives seeming so full and untouched, while his own felt completely and utterly ruined. He'd order the same drink, barely touch it, and leave without saying a word, as if he were slowly fading away from the world. The staff noticed him, of course. They saw the sad man in the corner, but they were busy, and they didn't care enough to pry. All of them, except for one person, a quiet girl named Grace. Grace worked at the cafe, moving softly and silently between tables. She was never loud, never in a rush. She was always careful and always watching. She noticed the small details about Alex that others missed. She saw how he never smiled, how his hands would sometimes shake when he held his cup, how his eyes looked exhausted even when the sun was shining brightly outside. She noticed how he always came alone and always left alone, carrying a pain that had no shape but felt heavy in the air around him. Grace never asked him anything. She never tried to start a conversation because she understood, perhaps better than anyone, that some pain needs silence more than it needs words. Days turned into weeks, and Alex's life continued its downward spiral. He stopped answering phone calls, stopped checking his messages. He had completely stopped believing that tomorrow could ever be better than today. One evening, the rain started to fall, hard and fast against the cafe windows, blurring the world outside into gray, watery lines. Alex sat there longer than usual that night. His hands were clenched into tight fists, his breathing was uneven, and his eyes were filled with tears. He was too tired to hide anymore. The pain inside him had finally become too much to bear, and for the first time, he let it show. He let the mask fall away. And Grace saw him. He saw the raw, unfiltered agony on his face. She froze for a moment, her own heart beating fast, because she recognized that look. It was a look she had worn herself a long time ago. Slowly, she walked toward his table. She placed his coffee down gently, and for a fleeting second, the entire cafe seemed to fall completely silent, hushed by the weight of the moment. Then, Grace did something unexpected. She broke her silence. In a soft, calm voice that barely rose above the gentle sound of the rain against the glass, she spoke one simple sentence. It was just one line, but it carried a weight that stopped Alex's world in that very moment. It was a sentence that made him lift his head, made him meet her eyes for the very first time, and made him feel something he hadn't felt in months. He felt a flicker, a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. He felt hope. After Grace spoke, she walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. Had she done the right thing? Had she overstepped? She couldn't be sure. Back at his table, Alex sat frozen, her words echoing in his mind, replaying over and over until they were the only sound left in the world. He watched her from a distance, seeing her in a way he never had before. He noticed the simple, neat way she tied back her hair, how she always seemed to move quietly, trying to avoid attention, careful not to disturb anyone's space. She was so different from everyone else, he knew, a stark contrast to the loud, empty promises that had defined his past. The next day, Alex found himself back at the cafe, much earlier than his usual coffee time. He wasn't there for the caffeine. He was there because he needed to understand. He needed to know why a complete stranger would care enough to say what she did, to reach out to him in that moment of quiet despair. Grace saw him the instant he walked through the door. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly turned away, pretending she hadn't noticed. She was afraid. Afraid that looking into his eyes again would stir up feelings she had fought so hard to bury deep inside. She busied herself, taking orders, wiping tables, serving other customers, all while feeling his presence like a magnetic pull. Alex waited patiently, though his mind was a storm of restless thoughts. His chest felt tight with 100 unspoken questions. Finally, her shift brought her to his table. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, laced with an uncertainty he couldn't hide. "For what you said last night?" For the first time, Grace looked directly at him, truly looked at him. He saw a profound kindness in her eyes, but it was mingled with a deep-seated sadness. The kind that hints at old wounds that never quite heal. She explained, her own voice soft, that she hadn't meant to interfere. "Sometimes," she said, "words just escape before fear has a chance to catch them and lock them away." In that moment, Alex realized something profound about her. Her strength wasn't in the words she had spoken, it was in the silence she had kept for so long. She was strong, not because she spoke up, but because she had endured so much without a word. Over the next few days, their connection began to grow, woven together by small, seemingly insignificant moments. They started with brief, polite conversations about the weather. Then came a shared smile across the crowded room. Soon, a quiet, gentle, "take care," as he left the cafe, became a regular part of his day. These small threads began to form a bond between them. Grace learned that Alex had once been a man full of big dreams and ambitions, but life had hollowed him out, leaving him feeling empty and lost. In return, Alex started to sense the weight of Grace's own burdens. He could feel the pain she carried, hidden carefully behind her calm expression and quiet, gentle nature. She never spoke about her past, not a single word, but her silence was a language of its own, and it spoke volumes. As he listened to her unspoken story, Alex felt a subtle shift within himself. It was a slow, unfamiliar sensation, like a heart that had forgotten how to beat, slowly learning its rhythm again. He started to look forward to seeing her each day, her presence becoming a quiet anchor in his drifting life. But just as this new, hopeful feeling began to take root, a shadow fell over it. He started to notice a change in Grace. She seemed distant, her thoughts miles away. There was a distracted look in her eyes, a kind of detachment that made him uneasy. It was as if she was silently preparing to leave, to disappear from his life just as quietly as she had entered it. A cold, familiar fear settled deep in Alex's gut. It was a feeling he knew all too well, the quiet dread that every good thing, every glimmer of light in his life, had a habit of vanishing without a warning, without a goodbye. He watched her move through the cafe, a ghost already, and wondered if he was destined to lose this connection too, before it ever truly had a chance to begin. The next evening, Alex arrived at the cafe with a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was a tangled mix of hope and fear, an emotion he couldn't quite name, but he knew what it meant. For the first time in a long while, someone's presence mattered to him again. The cafe was quieter than usual. Soft music drifted through the air. The lights were warm but low, creating a gentle, almost intimate atmosphere. Behind the counter, Grace was carefully arranging cups, her movements precise, as if imposing order on the porcelain could somehow calm the chaos in her own thoughts. Alex slid into his usual seat, his sanctuary in this small corner of the world. But tonight, his book remained closed. His eyes followed her every move. He noticed the weariness settled around her eyes, a shadow that the warm lights couldn't chase away. He saw how her smile appeared for the customers, a bright, practiced thing, but vanished the moment she thought no one was watching, leaving a quiet sadness in its place. He felt a pull, a desire to understand what was happening behind that brave facade. When Grace brought his coffee, she paused. The moment stretched longer than usual. He saw her fingers tighten around the edge of the tray, her knuckles white for a split second. Alex sensed it then, a heaviness that clung to her, something weighing on her mind. He opened his mouth, wanting to ask if she was okay, but the words caught in his throat. Fear stopped him, that old, familiar fear that had once kept him silent in a love that had slowly, painstakingly broken him. The fear of asking a question you might not be ready to hear the answer to. It was Grace who broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but steady, as if she had rehearsed the words 100 times. "I won't be working here anymore," she said, looking not at him, but at the table. "This is my last week." The words landed with a thud, hitting Alex harder than he ever would have expected. Suddenly, the cozy cafe felt small suffocating, like the walls were closing in on him. This place, his refuge, was about to lose the one thing that had started to make it feel like a beginning. Why? He managed to ask, his voice strained as he fought to keep it calm. He didn't want to seem desperate, didn't want to show how much her simple announcement had unsettled him. Grace just shook her head, a small, sad gesture. "Some things are better left unsaid," she whispered. That answer was a ghost from his past. It echoed the same empty explanations, the same vague departures that had left him stranded in a sea of confusion. It brought back the old pain of people walking out of his life without giving him the closure of a real reason, leaving him with nothing but questions that festered like wounds. Silence descended between them, thick and uncomfortable. It was filled with all the things they weren't saying. Then, Grace looked up. She looked at him, really looked at him, with an intensity that made him feel completely seen. It was as if she was weighing a decision, deciding whether to cross a line she had drawn for herself long ago. "I noticed your pain," she began, her voice still quiet but gaining strength. "From the very first day you walked in here, you carry your heartbreak like a shadow that never leaves your side." She continued, "That night in the rain, when I spoke to you, that wasn't planned. I don't usually do that." A faint, wry smile touched her lips. "I learned a long time ago to stay quiet, to hide, to protect my heart." She took a breath, and Alex knew she was about to share a piece of herself. "I once loved someone deeply, too," she admitted. "I trusted him completely, and I lost myself in the process. When it ended, I felt like I had lost everything. So, I built walls. I learned to keep people at a distance because I couldn't imagine breaking like that again." Alex listened, holding his breath, feeling every word sink into his soul. Her story wasn't just a story. It was a mirror. He saw his own reflection in her guarded eyes, in her carefully chosen words, in the quiet strength she used to keep her broken pieces together. He had built the exact same walls. He had learned the exact same lessons in silence and solitude. Then, Grace said something that shifted the very air between them. Her voice was gentle, but firm, carrying a truth that didn't need permission to enter his heart. "Losing everything," she said, her gaze holding his, "does not mean your life is over. It only means the old life was not meant to last." She paused, letting the words settle. "And sometimes, love ends not because you failed, but because it was never real enough to stay." That single sentence struck Alex with the force of a lightning bolt. It was more powerful than any advice he had ever received, any therapy session, any book he had read on healing. Because it didn't blame him. It didn't judge him. It didn't offer a simple, easy fix. It just offered a different perspective, a truth, the love he had lost. Maybe it ended not because he wasn't enough, but because the love itself wasn't enough. It wasn't real enough to survive. In that moment, something inside Alex broke. But this time, it wasn't the sound of shattering. It was the sound of release. It was the cracking of a dam he hadn't even realized he'd built, letting go of a flood of guilt that was never his to carry in the first place. He had been blaming himself for a story that was always destined to end. He finally found his voice. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt inadequate, too small for the gift she had just given him. Not just for that, but for seeing me when no one else did. A soft, genuine smile finally reached Grace's eyes, but it shimmered with unshed tears. She knew that in offering him a key, she was also turning a lock on a door she had kept bolted for years. She was opening herself up again, just by speaking her own truth aloud. She gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding, and walked back towards the counter. As Alex watched her go, a profound sense of clarity washed over him. Fate had already begun to weave a new pattern for his life. It wasn't a loud, dramatic event. It was quiet. It was happening in a small café, through a conversation with a girl who spoke only when her words truly mattered. It was happening because of one simple sentence that reminded him, with undeniable certainty, that his life was not finished yet. It was just beginning. After that night, something unseen but powerful began to grow between Alex and Grace. It wasn't fast or loud like the love Alex once knew, but slow and careful, like two wounded hearts learning how to trust again. Alex started coming to the cafe earlier and staying longer, not because he wanted to escape his life anymore, but because being there felt peaceful. The weight he carried seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Grace noticed the change in him right away. She saw it in the way his shoulders no longer looked so heavy, the way his eyes carried less darkness, and how he sometimes smiled without even realizing it. Their conversations became longer, still simple, still soft, but now filled with a deeper meaning. They started with small things, like favorite songs, quiet places in the city, and how silence could sometimes say more than words ever could. Grace told him she liked mornings because they felt honest, a fresh start. Alex shared how nights used to scare him, how they constantly reminded him of everything he had lost. As they opened up, they began to share pieces of their past, never all at once, never too deeply, but just enough to build a bridge of understanding between them. It was a delicate exchange of vulnerabilities, a slow dance of trust. Grace spoke about how love had hurt her, how it taught her to be quiet because speaking once felt like reopening a wound that never properly closed. Grace listened, and then she told him that loving deeply was not a weakness. Hearing those words from her was like a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten was there. It made him feel lighter, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden of shame that was uneven his to begin with. Days turned into weeks, and their routine became a comforting rhythm in Alex's life. He started sending out job applications again, something he had avoided for months. He noticed that hope no longer felt like a lie he was telling himself. Grace encouraged him quietly, never pushing, just gently reminding him that he was capable of more than he believed. Her faith in him became a mirror, reflecting a version of himself he'd forgotten existed. They started taking short walks after a shift, the city lights painting a soft glow around them. They talked under the warm hum of streetlights, shared comfortable silences, and learned the unique sound of each other's laughter. It was in these small, unassuming moments that their bond deepened, growing stronger in the quiet spaces between words. Yet, beneath the surface of these calm moments, there was an unspoken fear. Alex sensed that Grace was holding something back, a truth she wasn't ready to share. He could feel a wall he couldn't quite see, and it worried him more than he wanted to admit. He tried to push the feeling away, not wanting to disrupt the fragile peace they had built. Then, one evening, she didn't show up for work. The cafe felt strangely empty without her. The next day, her seat behind the counter was empty again. Alex waited, his eyes darting to the door again and again, his chest tightening with each passing minute. A familiar, cold fear began to creep back in, the fear of being left without an explanation, of history repeating itself. When he finally gathered the courage to ask another worker about her, the answer was vague and unhelpful. She had taken some time off, they said, maybe longer than expected. That was all they knew, or all they were willing to say. The uncertainty was suffocating. That night, Alex walked home alone, and the streets felt colder, emptier than they had in weeks. The city that had started to feel like a friend now seemed like a stranger once more. He realized then, with a startling clarity, how deeply Grace had become a part of his life without him even noticing. Her quiet presence had filled a space inside him he thought was permanently broken, a void he had accepted as his new reality. For the first time since his heartbreak, he was afraid of losing someone again. But this fear was different. It wasn't born from dependence, from needing someone to fix him. It was born from genuine care, from the simple, undeniable fact that she mattered. She mattered to him, deeply. As he lay awake that night, staring at the shadows on his ceiling, Alex understood something profound. Love had returned to his life quietly, without grand declarations or passionate promises, without any demands at all. Grace didn't return the next day, nor the day after that. With every empty hour, the fear inside Alex grew stronger, pressing on his chest like a weight he couldn't push away. He tried to tell himself she would come back, that people were allowed to disappear for a while, to take some time for themselves. But his mind, scarred by past silences, refused to believe it. Silence had hurt him before, and it was doing it again, echoing in the quiet corners of his apartment where her laughter should have been. On the third day, he couldn't bear the waiting any longer. He went to the cafe, his voice surprisingly calm when he asked about her, but his hands betrayed him, shaking in his pockets. One of the workers hesitated, a flicker of pity in their eyes, before quietly telling him that Grace had left the job for good. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. Those words cut deep, tearing open old wounds Alex thought had finally healed. He walked out of the cafe slowly, the world blurring around him, feeling foolish for believing this time could be different. He had let himself hope, and now the silence was his only answer. But as he walked, something inside him, a stubborn ember of defiance, refused to let the story end like that. This wasn't the Grace he knew. The Grace he knew was thoughtful, kind, someone who noticed the little things. She wasn't the kind of person who vanished without a reason. He replayed their conversations in his mind, searching for a sign he had missed. He remembered her tired eyes, the faint shadows beneath them. He recalled her distant smile, the one that never quite reached those eyes, and the way she sometimes paused, mid-sentence, as if holding back a wave of pain. These weren't just quirks. They were pieces of a puzzle he now desperately needed to solve. That night, consumed by a need for answers, Alex fell down the rabbit hole of the internet. He searched for her online, scrolling through old posts, photos, and stray comments, looking for any clue, any whisper of where she might be. The hours bled into one another, his screen glowing in the dark room. And then, he found it. A short, cryptic message she had shared weeks earlier. It spoke of hospitals, long nights, and waiting. His heart dropped, a cold dread washing over him. It was a single breadcrumb, but it was enough. The next morning, he followed the address linked to the post. His steps were heavy, a strange mix of fear and hope weighing him down. Fear of what he might find, and a desperate hope that he was wrong. The building was quiet, sterile, and filled with the soft, rhythmic sound of machines and whispered conversations, the unmistakable sounds of a place that holds both life and loss. When he asked for Grace at the front desk, the nurse looked at him with gentle, knowing eyes and pointed him down a long, quiet hallway. Alex's heart raced with every step he took down that corridor. Each footfall felt momentous, as if he were walking toward a moment that could change his life forever. He found her sitting by a window, bathed in the pale morning light. She was thinner than he remembered, her face pale, but strangely calm, as if she had already made peace with something the rest of the world was still fighting. She looked up and saw him. A flash of surprise, then fear, then a wave of raw emotion washed over her face. She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice broke, the words catching in her throat. In that moment, Alex understood without her having to say a thing. The tired eyes, the sudden departure, the hospital, it all clicked into place. Grace had been sick. For a long time. She left the café, not out of malice, but out of fear. She didn't want anyone to worry. She didn't want to become a burden. And most of all, she didn't want love to take root in a place where pain might soon follow. In her mind, distance was the kindest thing she could offer. Alex sat beside her, the silence between them heavy but not empty. A storm of anger and sadness churned inside him, not at her, but at the fear that had forced her into hiding, that made her believe she had to face this alone. He looked at her and told her, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest, that disappearing, that silence. It hurt more than the truth ever could. Grace looked down at her hands, tears finally falling, tracing paths down her pale cheeks. She admitted she always believed people only stayed when things were easy, that they would scatter at the first sign of a storm. She didn't think anyone would willingly choose to stand in the rain with her. Listening to her, Alex saw a reflection of his own past fears. He told her about his own history, about how being left without answers had shattered him, and how meeting her, finding a connection with her, had helped him start to stand on his own 2 feet again. He hadn't planned to say what he said next. The words felt terrifying, risky, but they were the truest thing he knew. He told her he loved her, not because she was perfect, not because she healed him, but because she was real. Because she was honest and strong and brave, even in her quiet, hidden way. At his words, Grace cried openly, the walls she had built around her heart finally crumbling. She confessed she had fallen for him too, but had never allowed herself to believe she deserved that kind of happiness, especially not now. Alex reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and steady. He didn't make grand, unrealistic promises. He didn't promise a cure or a perfect future. He promised something simpler and far more profound. He promised that he would not walk away just because things were hard. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the weight of uncertainty, they finally faced the painful, beautiful truth together. Love doesn't wait for life to be perfect. It doesn't arrive after all the battles are won. It shows up in the middle of the mess, when 2 people make the brave choice to stay, to hold on, and to face an unknown future, together. Life didn't change overnight after that day in the hospital. The world outside remained the same, but inside, Alex and Grace, something profound had shifted. It was a change that was steady and real, something that didn't depend on perfect health, easy days, or empty promises. It was the quiet beginning of a love built not on illusions, but on shared vulnerability. Alex started visiting Grace regularly. His visits weren't grand gestures. Sometimes he brought coffee, its warm aroma filling the sterile hospital room. Other times, he would just sit beside her in comfortable silence, a silent guardian against the encroaching loneliness. He had learned a crucial lesson. Presence often mattered more than words. Just being there was enough. In that quiet, safe space Alex created, Grace slowly began to open up. She spoke of the fear that had been her constant companion for years, a shadow she could never quite shake. She confessed how she'd come to believe that love was a prelude to loss, a beautiful, fragile thing destined to break. And so, she had built walls around her heart, choosing silence because it felt safer than hoping for a happiness that could be snatched away at any moment. Alex listened. He didn't interrupt, he didn't offer solutions, and he didn't try to fix her pain with hollow reassurances. He simply let her feel seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her life. He held her stories with a gentle respect, validating her feelings without judgment. As the days turned into weeks, a transformation began. Grace's strength, which had been hiding behind her fear, started to reveal itself in small, beautiful ways. A tentative smile would grace her lips, at first fleeting, then lingering longer. Her laughter, once a distant memory, began to find its way back, a soft, musical sound that filled the room with light. She started to believe again, not in a fairy tale ending, but in the simple, powerful truth that her life was still worth fighting for. The fight was no longer a solitary battle. She had an ally. And Alex, in witnessing her resilience, found himself changing too. The feeling of being broken and useless. That heavy cloak he had been wearing since his world fell apart began to feel lighter. He was no longer defined by his failures or his losses. He started rebuilding his life, piece by piece, with a newfound sense of purpose. He began applying for jobs again, not with the desperation of before, but with a quiet confidence. He took small, deliberate steps forward, each one a victory. He realized that love wasn't a distraction from his own healing. It was the very thing that pushed him toward it. Grace's fight inspired his own. Her courage gave him courage. Of course, it wasn't a linear path. There were difficult days when the ghost of fear would return, whispering doubts in their ears. Days when the hospital walls felt like they were closing in, and the future seemed like an uncertain, foggy landscape. But they faced those moments together. Instead of pretending everything was fine, they held on to honesty. They would talk about their fears, giving them a name and a shape, which somehow made them less terrifying. They learned that real love wasn't the loud, dramatic declarations seen in movies. It was quiet. It was patient. It was simply being present, a steady hand to hold, even on the hardest of days. Grace, in turn, was learning a new way to exist in the world. She discovered that she didn't need to make herself small or disappear to protect others from her pain. She learned that being truly loved meant allowing someone to share her burdens as well as her joys. It meant letting Alex see her on her worst days and trusting that he wouldn't turn away. This mutual acceptance became the foundation of their bond, a foundation built on truth, not pretense. It was a love that didn't demand perfection, but celebrated a shared, beautiful imperfection. Months passed. The seasons began to change, and with them, their lives began to open up again. Grace's health improved, a recovery fueled not just by medical treatment, but by the powerful medicine of no longer feeling alone in her fight. Hope was a potent catalyst for healing. Alex found steady work. It wasn't a glamorous or high-powered job like the one he'd lost, but it was meaningful. It gave him a sense of purpose and a reason to get up in the morning. It was enough. The big, ambitious dreams of his past were replaced by something quieter and far more fulfilling. They filled their evenings with simple pleasures. They would walk together as the sun went down, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. They talked about simple dreams, not grand, 5-year plans. They spoke of moments they hoped to share, watching sunsets from a porch, the sound of shared laughter filling a small home, the feeling of peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be. They were building a future, not on grand promises, but on a series of small, cherished moments. One evening, as they sat on a park bench, quietly watching the sky shift from blue to twilight purple, Grace turned to Alex. With a soft smile, she reminded him of the first sentence she ever spoke to him in that cafe, the line that had caught him so off guard. "Looks like you could use this more than me." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. He realized in that moment how that single, simple line had completely altered the trajectory of his life. It was the catalyst, the gentle nudge from fate that he had so desperately needed. Alex told her that losing everything, which at the time had felt like the end of his world, was actually the beginning. It wasn't the end. It was the painful, necessary act of clearing the path for something real, something true, to enter his life. He had to lose the life he thought he wanted to find the life he truly needed. They both understood a fundamental truth about their journey. Love didn't save them by miraculously removing all their pain. It saved them by giving that pain meaning. Their scars weren't something to be hidden. They were maps of where they had been, testaments to their survival. The past no longer held them captive in its grip. Fear no longer had the power to dictate their future. What they had built together wasn't perfect, and they knew it never would be. It had cracks and weathered edges, but it was honest. And that honesty made it stronger than anything they had ever known. It was a love that could withstand storms because it wasn't afraid of the rain. As time moved forward, Alex and Grace stood side by side, equals in a partnership forged in adversity. They knew that their fate had been changed by a loud clap of thunder or a dramatic twist. It had changed quietly, almost imperceptibly, through the slow and steady application of patience, courage, and one simple sentence spoken at exactly the right moment. A sentence that had the power to turn loss into love, and to teach them both that sometimes the very softest voices, the ones that speak from a place of genuine kindness, carry the power to change everything. Their story wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And in its reality, it was more beautiful than any fairy tale could ever be. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking and subscribing for more content that explores the power of human connection.